Hi everybody, I'm sitting here with Mr. John Connolly. How are you?
I'm great.
Excellent.
Thank you.
John is going to be joining us on our frequently asked questions. So this will be fun. John is, I'm going to call you the closest thing to a Pro Tools expert I've ever met in my life.
Wow. All right. Thank you.
And, you know, I will say expert lightly because as you know...
You're taking it back already?
No, I'm sure you agree with this. None of us really like experts, you know, because they're the ones that are always telling us we're doing it wrong.
That's true, yeah.
But you're the guy I rely on when we have any kind of issues. And very popular out here in sunny Los Angeles, keeping us all of our rigs running. So this is going to be a double whammy. We're going to do frequently asked questions. We're also going to push a little Pro Tools course that you have done. And I'm calling it I think we're calling it the Ultimate Pro Tools course, because you're going to take us from the beginning stages right through to mixing and editing, and as you were mentioning earlier, error messages you might get, what computer compatibility. It is like, it's going to help so many people out.
Yeah, beginning to advanced users.
Excellent.
Yes.
So you're a mainstay here in sunny Los Angeles.
I've been here for a while, yes. Not originally from here, Bay Area, but been here since 1999.
99.
20 years. Oh.
When did you join Avid? Because you were with Avid for a while.
DigiDesign.
Oh yeah, sorry. DigiDesign.
Let's get that right.
Which is funny because I still occasionally call them DigiDesign. I can't believe I got the right name wrong and the wrong name right. Whatever.
I started with DigiDesign, which is from the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, in 1995.
95.
Tech support.
Tech support.
Yeah. So phone calls. So if anybody called up there from 95 through 99, you may have spoken to me before, for you longtime Pro Tools users. You
were with them for a while, and when a few years ago I had a problem, I called our mutual friend Ed, and he's like, no, who's still at Avid, and said, no, just call John.
Yes, yeah, Ed.
Yeah. So give us a little bit of background. How did you get into the wonderful world of music?
Well, I was just a local musician up in the Bay Area, doing clubs and weddings and corporate parties and all that stuff, nothing serious. And I was doing live sound and stuff as well. And I got a job at Huart Packard, and then someone referred me to this little company that had, they do music and computers. It was kind of an odd combination at that time, DigiDesign. And so I applied for a gig there. At that time, musicians didn't have a lot of computer background. It was just starting to get into the computer age a little bit. So started in tech support. I had some computer background from Huart Packard, and was at DigiDesign tech support in the Bay Area, 95 through 99. And then in 99, I moved down here with DigiDesign, part of the sales team. I was a product specialist. And I would do demos and Pro Tools clinics and Pro Tools training. I had a few big Pro Tools rigs that I would just move around town. Are you interested in Pro Tools? Here, try out this Pro Tools rig for a week. So I would do that. I did a lot of support. And then that was up through about 2008, 2009. Started my own company, Pro Tools Services. Still with Avid at that time. And then shortly after that, I guess it was about 2011, I moved into the Avid training department, and my job at that point was to go to schools. It was mainly universities, colleges, vocational schools, some high schools, and train the instructors at all levels of Pro Tools, from beginners up to expert, or maybe consoles if they had a D Control, or later on the S6. So just did a lot of training for Avid. And now I'm no longer with Avid. I was with Avid for about 20 years. And now I still do all of the above: support, training. I call it Pro Tools therapy. It's all of the, thin line between training and support, and let people vent. And so that's it.
Yeah, you've listened to me vent on numerous occasions.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's part of it.
Yeah. We've definitely had our venting moments.
Yeah, get it off your chest. All right, now let's get to fixing the Pro Tools.
Yeah. I'm a beginner, and I made a rule for myself to only use stock plugins until I get to the point where I have a good understanding of how the basics work, especially EQ, compression, reverb, and delay. Is it your opinion that I may be limiting myself too much by avoiding third-party plugins?
That's a good question. And I kind of subscribe to that rule myself, not because, well, I do use third party, but one of the reasons I stick to stock plugins predominantly is because I know every system is going to have those. So if and I'm at different systems all the time. So if I create a session and I take it to your studio, I know that the plugins are all going to be there. So yeah, there's nothing wrong with getting familiar with all the stock, because, well, as far as Pro Tools is concerned, and I'm sure Cubase and Logic, they all come with a large number of plugins as well. So saying stock is not a limited number in any of these applications. Sure. So I think, yeah, that's not a bad idea, but at the same time, there's a lot of really cool plugins out there.
I've done it a couple of times myself where I've either mixed stock or I've mixed only one manufacturer's plugins. And the only two plugins that I miss are the Waves R-Bass and the Waves MV2. Those are the only two that I don't know. I can mix completely in stock and get a good result. But the R-Bass, just one knob, you just turn, there it is. I need some more low end on my kick. I need some more low end on my bass guitar. I want to add a little bit to the toms. And it's just so quick and so easy. And then the MV2 with that feature where it just brings the low level information and then crushes the high. And it means I don't have to parallel. It just saves me, I don't have to compress as much, I don't have to limit as much.
Yeah.
They're like these two time-saving plugins. That's the thing, is like with the MV2, I can do what it does, but I have to create a parallel, and I have to compress, and then I have to blend the two, and then I sum those two to one and limit them together.
You're jumping through some hoops to get to the same result of one plugin.
I've got three buses rather than one.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, and the same thing with the R-Bass. It's like I can boost the low end and compress it, boost the low end and compress it, and just kind of finally get that low end that I want. Or I can just take one plugin and go boop, boost, there, it's done.
Done, move on.
So it's, and it's interesting, and I've got used to them. I've got used to that stuff. But I know what you mean, and I do subscribe to exactly what this person's talking about, because...
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I tend to use a handful of plugins that aren't stock, but are really the basic plugins, like the REQs and Waves. I mean...
They've been around forever.
Yeah. They're like legacy plugins. They're like 20-something years old. Yeah. But they're my stock plugins. I know how to quickly EQ something in 2 seconds.
Yeah.
It's just when Avid first started, their EQ wasn't as good. And the other one they offered was that early Focusrite one, and I hated using the interface. Do you remember? It just was like a mimic of the knobs.
Yes.
I don't really know why. You know what I mean?
That was early, hardware graphics. It was kind of the beginning of it. Yeah. No, you're right. The first EQ plugins were very basic. Definitely. Yeah. But nowadays, like I said, and this applies to any of the applications, I think out of the gate, the stock plugins are more than capable of editing, mixing, and getting great results.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm new to all of this. I want to learn from scratch. How do I do it the right way? Any beginner books you think would be beneficial?
Well, so I'm assuming they're talking about engineering, recording,
just recording
editing.
In general,
Yeah. So when you use QuickBooks, you become an accountant. When you use Pro Tools or Cubase or Logic, whatever the case may be, you become an engineer, but you also become the performer because you're performing. Mm-hmm. You also become the producer. You become the mixer. Mm-hmm. All these different hats that you wear, and it can be daunting at first. But to get started, I think jump in, get whatever application it is that you want, and jump in. As far as books, I lean towards Pro Tools. There's a Pro Tools 101 book that's available from Avid, and it's not so much teaching you how to be an engineer, but it is teaching you how to use Pro Tools, and by doing so, you're dabbling in the engineering part. As far as engineering books, the Bobby Osinski Engineering Handbook, that's a great book. And I think it starts, it's got some basic stuff, and of course it goes very deep as well. And then, your videos, there's always YouTube. There's a lot of good resources.
Good stuff in the video. But I understand it's a bit like when people ask me the question of like, should I go to school? I'm like, are you the kind of person that likes to go to schools? And if they're like, yeah, I love going to schools. then go to school.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, so I understand if some people love reading books. They love like having a manual open and reading a book and studying
School structure.
Yeah, and if that's where your brain is at, then there's a lot of great books. Now there is an industry standard one. The reason why I say that is because we have so many interns coming through that they have been to all these different recording schools. And the book is, and we're looking up here, is David Miles Huber's book called Modern Recording Techniques. And actually the AES stands behind it, Audio Engineering Society. I actually have a copy of this book, and I've looked through it many times, and it's pretty detailed. This person has done a lot of research and probably interviewed 1 million people as well as bringing their own knowledge. And it is a really good book. And I know Eric's did that, and a lot of other students I've had come through have like name-checked this book. So
Cool.
it seems like a pretty much a standard. And you know, if AES is standing behind it, I'm assuming that
that's
must be
a
pretty
legit
accurate.
endorsement.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
But Bobby does great stuff. We've done lots of stuff with Bobby as well.
Yeah.
Good.
Plus,
Good
there's
ideas.
a lot of schools everywhere now. The recording programs are even in high schools these days now that did not exist at all
Fantastic.
when I was in school. So your community college or wherever, if you're into doing the school program, that's very viable as well.
You're with Avid for a long time.
Yes.
You have seen every iteration from DigiDesign through Avid, all of the different kind of hardwares and stuff like
Yes.
that. I suppose I wonder, where do you think it's going to go? Are they getting, because now they're giving us, you know, the ability to work with any of the different interfaces. It's not a hardware-based thing. Is it completely going native, do you think?
I think computers have gotten to the point now where a native system is quite viable for a lot of people, no doubt. For a long time, it was not the case, and if you wanted to use, run larger sessions, the latency and the computer power was not quite there. I don't think that's the case. I think. And that was the whole purpose of the HD native systems that Avid came out with. The computers got to a place where it was quite viable for a lot of people. The price came down, so you could do a lot of work on a native system. With that said, the HDX cards are still quite viable as well. You know, that power on demand. You've got really large sessions, really low latency, all kinds of, you're tracking a band and you want to have multiple headphone mixes with processing, EQs, compressors, reverbs, all that running live at a really low latency level, then HDX is still quite viable. So I don't know when it will get to the point when HDX cards are absolutely out of the picture. I suppose it'll get there. But I don't know. It's a good question. So I know HDX cards are still quite popular. That's for sure.
I mean, that was always the thing with Pro Tools, wasn't it? It was like the Pro Tools cards were faster than the computers they were going in.
Oh, absolutely.
It was unbelievable. When I first got a TDM system, I had a D24,
right,
which is mid-late 90s, and I went to a TDM and it was like Mix Plus, and it was like, what?
Well, if you think about the computers at that time, let's say early 2000s, your iPhone is probably 5-10 times more powerful than your Mac Tower or whatever it was, G3, whatever it was at the time. So to
I started on a 9600.
9600, yeah. So
6 PCI slots.
What were those? 80 megahertz, 100 megahertz,
something like that. Yeah.
So the thought of running any sort of processing in terms of plugins was just out of the question, really. So of course, not the case nowadays. So even with a laptop, iMac, Mac Minis, or a comparable PC in that horsepower range is more than capable. It's quite surprising.
Here's an interesting question. This came up as a whole question a couple of weeks ago, and I had to explain what professionals call stems. We call stems where people blend things together and go, here's all the keys, stereo files. But now people are calling stems just tracks. They go, I'll send you the stems, and then you get all the tracks. Or you think you're going to get, you think you're going to get tracks and you get stems. It's like really kind of a confused world now. I received stems for mixing. They recorded everything in one room, so every stem has lots of instrument bleeding. What is the best process to clean up the mix? Do you leave the bleeding and EQ as best as possible, or do you gate, or do you sprinkle some sort of magical dust over it? Well, firstly, I would go back and say, do you mean tracks or stems? You know, because if they are, maybe they bounce things together. Because for me, it's like if they've given you individual tracks, there's definitely going to be instrument bleeding. I personally subscribe to, like, if stuff is bleeding, leave it. I
would agree. Yeah.
I had a situation 15 years ago. I recorded and mixed the Ramones tribute concert, and it was the Chili Peppers and like all of these bands played. And we recorded it. It was like, I don't remember, the Palladium or something, I don't know, Coliseum, wherever it was. It was here in LA. And Anthony Kiedis likes to spin around, if you've ever seen him live. You know, he spins around like this. And every time he went around the drum kit, it was psh, psh, it was all this like cymbal bleed. So I had this vocal mic that was going psh,
oh no.
And then there was other times he was like, give it away. And it was cymbals and everything bleeding in. I cannot tell you how many plugins I tried. I was automating like all of the bleed, you know, of all the guitars and the cymbals between every time he sang. And then so I was automating it like this, then bringing it up. I tried gating, and eventually I went in there and I automated every like syllable by syllable. It sounded like, give it a shape with, and so all this, like, you just couldn't get rid of the cymbal bleed and everything. Yeah. So then I started like taking and EQing out the cymbal hits and then cross-fading it into a word. I mean, it took like half a day to do a vocal line, and I played it back, and it still sounded like. Psh, 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 psh. I remember getting really frustrated, and I was in my old Neve room, and Jack Douglas was tracking the room next door, and I came in and I played it to him, and I was like, "What do I do? It sounds awful." And he's like, "Take it all off." So I took it all off.
All the plugins.
All the plugins.
Yeah.
You know, just mix the vocal gently, and put some reverb on it, and then put it back in, and it was like, oh. It was like...
So the moral is leave the bleed.
Leave the bleed, yeah. It sounds like, to answer your question directly, they were recording everything in one room. Maybe that's what they wanted.
Right, absolutely.
So maybe just sort of enhance it. Let it be. I mean, Shelley Yakus did all of his records with all the band in one room, including vocals. Tom Petty records, everybody was in the same room.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And last time I listened to Damn the Torpedoes, it sounded amazing. What would you pack if you were going to do a session in an unfamiliar studio? A favorite mic? Wave files of songs you know well? Favorite headphones? What is your flyaway kit, so to speak? So basically they're just asking, like, somebody says to you, you're going into X, Y, or Z studio. What is the one thing that you, or several things that you would always just pick up and take with you?
Well, because most of the Pro Tools most of the gigs I'm doing, I'm installing, supporting, training. For a recording gig, it would require, you know, a little bit of homework. What am I doing there? Is it vocals? Am I tracking a band? That would dictate a lot of that. I would definitely have my hard drive of some audio files that I want to listen to, and hopefully become familiar with their control room and their speakers. Microphones, I might bring a handful, definitely. And again, depending on what we're doing there.
Do you have favorite headphones?
I do have a pair of the blue headphones that I'm quite fond of. And I guess it would depend, you know, what the room is, and have I been there before? Am I walking in blind? I don't know what's going on in this room. Then I might be more inclined to bring more things.
You did touch on bringing music you're familiar with, though.
Yeah, you know, I think the go-to is, you know, the Steely Dan tracks. Everybody has a couple of those that they'll play, and then just whatever I happen to be listening to at the time. Maybe it's in the genre of what I might be recording or mixing or listening to. I would probably lean towards that a bit if I could.
But I think the answer is twofold. It's like obviously knowing the artist. So like, what piece of equipment would suit the artist, but also studios. For me, it's like I will open up a studio and just look at the gear list and then call them up,
right,
and see if there's anything that isn't on there that, you know, might be an additional thing. Or frankly, sometimes you look at the gear list and you get there and they've sold half of it.
Or it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'm being really, really honest. I mean, these days with a lot of, and I understand why, a lot of the kind of legacy studios you go to. I mean, when you and I were kids, you go to a studio and they'd have like 6 1176s, like 4 160 VUs, couple of LA2. I mean, they had literally
Right.
30 compressors.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Now when I go to a studio, they might have 3.
Yeah.
Even some of the most famous studios.
Yeah.
Because people aren't necessarily mixing out of the box anymore. They're not going to be mixing on a Neve. There are people, obviously, but they're not typically mixing on a Neve. They're going to a studio to track.
Right.
And they might, most guys are tracking a drum kit, might put a little 160 on an inside kick mic.
On the way in.
Yeah, maybe on that, maybe a LM76 on the snare, maybe some stereo compression on either the overheads or rooms. But at the end of the day, 2, 3, maybe 4 compressors maximum on a drum kit for anybody I can think of that I admire as an engineer. So they don't really need 30, compressors anymore. So I have been in many situations where I've turned up in a town that I don't know, at a studio I don't know, expecting to see 12 compressors, and I've got 2.
Yeah. Well,
so that phone call is definitely very important.
no, absolutely. Well, and you bring up a whole nother conversation of plugins and inside the box and even tracking, tracking through plugins or not, definitely mixing. There's a lot of people that are completely in the box. So that outboard gear and what you need to bring with you, maybe it's you're bringing your dongle with your your plug-in installers with you is a very likely scenario these days as well. So
yeah, in my studios that I've had over the years, I've had many guys turn up, a little flash drive and dump all their plugins in, plug in their iLock, and off they go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think to answer your question, when you touched on microphone, if you do have a favorite vocal microphone and you think it might work for that singer, and it's it could be anything. It doesn't necessarily have to be a $20,000 microphone. It just might be that microphone that you love. Why not? Bring it with you. It can't really hurt.
That's right.
So I think it's the same thing back in ye olden days of the late 90s to sort of mid 2000s. I mean, we used to fly with flight cases full of stuff. I mean, it was insane.
Yeah, that was the norm. Yeah, absolutely. Well, you had to. You didn't have a choice then.
Yep.
Nowadays, you can get by without that. Even the smaller audio interfaces sound great these days, comparatively speaking, and so you don't need massive amounts of gear like you used to.
Yep. So I think the answer is choice pieces of equipment and making that phone call and understanding your artist needs and what the studio has, and then fill in the gaps. What is phase and why is it important?
Definitely can be an issue if you're recording something that with 2 or more microphones. The drum kit is typically where phase rears its ugly head. If you've got mics that are maybe not properly placed, you'll have frequency cancellation, comb filtering, that kind of thing. And it's kind of a tricky thing if you're not familiar with it. It's mono is your key to discovering phase. If you have the ability on your monitoring device, whatever it may be, or the ability to mono out your tracks, you will hear your stereo field kind of collapse, or different frequencies will get weird or disappear or accentuate. If you go to mono and you're hearing your sound kind of change, you may have a phase issue, but it's a frequency mismatch.
Obviously, the low end's the first thing that usually has difficulty because of those huge frequencies, like long waveforms.
Right.
It's very easy for one to be like slightly off from the other and just cause all kinds of mud issues down there. Cancellation of good clarity. I think that I always think of like bass sounds in particular, like if you take a DI and just use the low end from the DI and then more of the high mids and everything from the bass amp, you get more bottom end than when you use 2 sources. Because no matter how you try to line up the polarity, the phase, there's always a cancellation that goes on.
Right, yeah,
So
tough to do.
So it's tough. I know a lot of guys, when they mix kick drums, will find the lowest kind of fundamental from one mic and then remove low end from the other mics. They get more kind of, pure low end from it. But yeah, phase is super important. I think I heard Dave Jordan say a few years ago to me, he said that it's the most important thing in recording and mixing.
Yeah, I would agree. Definitely mixing. So another example, if you have tracks in your session, and this would be any application, not Pro Tools alone, you add certain plugins to one track and not another, there will be a delay introduced in one track, and that can create a phase or a phasing issue.
Even with delay compensation in Pro Tools, I'm a little superstitious.
Yeah, it's pretty damn good. I can put it to the test, but yeah, delay compensation should handle it. But it is possible to outsmart delay compensation. There are some different routing things, but all in all, it's pretty good, I'll say. But,
yeah, what I have this tendency to do is if I've got like parallel buses, I'll use the same plugins on them to do less or more. So if I have a drum bus and I've got, some kind of saturation, some compression, some EQ and limiting, I'll duplicate that. And for the smashed one, I'll use those same plugins, but use it more aggressively.
Right. Yeah.
So then I never have any.
So you know that the latency you've put on one track is the same on the other track, and you don't have to worry about it.
Now that does come from a time, because we're talking about, I started using Pro Tools about the same time you started working with them. And to be honest, you couldn't, you had to do that.
Yeah, you had to manage it. Absolutely.
And it was definitely fun.
Yeah, well, that's one way of putting it. Yeah, well, so it was not only plugins that would do it, but routing inside Pro Tools would incur a delay. So if you routed one track one way and another track a different way, and I keep going back to drums because that's where it's most likely or very obvious. So yeah, phase is an issue.
4 to 20 mics on a drum kit. So all kinds of potential phase polarity issues. All right, thank you, John. I really appreciate it.
Thank
you.
It
was a lot of fun. Please leave a bunch of comments and questions below. Don't forget, we scour these questions down here for future Fact Friday. Also, John has a course coming out. And it's tell us a little bit about the course. I'm calling it, what are we calling it? We're calling it the Ultimate Pro Tools course. How about that?
The Ultimate Pro Tools course, yeah. So this is a Pro Tools video tutorial class, if you want, and it starts from the very basics, right? So if you've never used Pro Tools before, this is perfect for you. If you have used Pro Tools before, I don't want to say I guarantee, but I'm sure you'll get some nuggets out of it. There will be some great some great features and tips and tricks that you'll get out of it. It's pretty comprehensive. We put in a lot of time on this, so
you did the hard work.
Yes.
Well, he did the hard work.
It covers from installing Pro Tools software at the very beginning. Compatibility. Are you a Mac or a PC? What kind of Mac or a PC do you need? What do you want? And installing the plugins, the stock plugins, third-party plugins, and editing, mixing, Pro Tools features, a little bit of support. How do I fix these error messages that I might be getting, and what are your resources available to get you through that? So
that's fantastic.
It's a pretty comprehensive.
It's the Ultimate Pro Tools course.
It's the Ultimate Pro Tools. Yeah, and you don't have to be a Pro Tools Ultimate user.
Yeah.
This applies to Pro Tools. I call it standard version.
Yep.
So if you have a smaller Pro Tools system, or you've got a big Pro Tools Ultimate system, it will apply to both.
Everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic. Well, thanks so much.
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
So check it out and have a marvelous time of recording and mixing.